right. Well, if you've ever been a Christian for any amount of time, if you've been in the church at all for more than a day, you've probably heard some pretty cringy Christian cliches, probably from your parents or your pastor. And so I want to just share a few of my favorite with you. The first one, it's funny. Jason just said one of these while he was up there, but I'll get to it. The first one is when people say, I want to lift you up in prayer. What does that mean? I'm going to lift you up in prayer. How do you do that? Does anybody want to demonstrate for us lifting somebody up in prayer? What about when somebody prays a hedge of protection around you? You guys ever heard that before? Let's just pray a hedge of protection over you. What is a hedge going to do? It's not very strong. It's not going to keep anybody out. No hedges are keeping anybody out. No hedge is going to keep any enemy. The devil's not getting stopped by a hedge. What about if you're going on a trip and somebody prays traveling mercies over you? Have you heard that before? Yeah, we just want to pray traveling mercies on you today. Or in the church, we got lots of prayer warriors. Yeah, come on, prayer warriors. Amen. Some people will just over-spiritualize things and say, like, I really feel called. I feel called to go to Wendy's today. I just really feel like this is where Jason's thing came in. I feel like I'm in a season of fill in the blank. I'm in a season of singleness right now. I'm in a season of ministry. I'm in a season of joy. I'm in a season of heartache. What are these seasons? I only know 4, but probably the biggest cliche that I hear and that you've probably heard is, what would Jesus do? Right? We've all heard that. How many of you guys have a WWJD bracelet on right now? What would Jesus do? I mean, we hear it all the time. Usually it's somebody trying to guilt trip you into acting more Christ-like. But let's be honest, we are trying to be like Jesus, right? If you're here today and you're a Christ follower, by the way, if you're not, that's totally cool. We're glad you're here. But if you call yourself a Christ follower, what does that mean? It means that you want to follow Christ. It means you want to be more like Jesus. So you have to ask yourself the question, what would Jesus do? And maybe you've heard that time and time and time again, and you're kind of sick of hearing it because you feel like it's kind of put on you that you got to act different than all of your friends. You see all your friends out there partying. They seem like they're having a great time. They don't have a care in the world. They just do whatever they feel like doing. And for you, you got all these rules that you're living by. I got to live like Jesus. Just kind of seems like it's cramping my style. It just kind of seems like it's ruining all of my fun. Why on earth would I actually want to live like Jesus? Well, the Bible tells us to. Okay. But give me something a little bit more than that. What we're going to find today is that we shouldn't just live like Jesus just because the Bible says we should, although that's a good enough reason in and of itself. But what you're going to see today is that living like Jesus does is actually going to lead you to the most abundant, fulfilling life ever, as opposed to the most unfulfilling, dissatisfied life you can live. Practically speaking, why should I follow Jesus? Why should I live like him? Practically speaking, why is living like Jesus better? And that's the whole point of this series that we're in. We're answering the question, why? Why though? Why should I read my Bible? Why should I believe in God? Why should I live like Jesus? Practically speaking, why? Now, it doesn't take you very long to realize that humans do not know how to live well. Take a look around, open the news app. Are we doing a good job? No. We kind of suck at living well. We kind of mess everything up all the time. And I've contributed to this. We're not good at living, okay? We don't always get it right, We struggle constantly. We pursue things that we think are going to give us purpose and value in life, and then it just leaves us depressed. We think if I get this job or I get this girlfriend or this new car, that is going to solve all my problems and everything is going to be great. And then we get it, and it doesn't, and we're still just as anxious, and we're still just as depressed and unfulfilled. And we go from one thing to the next thinking that it'll solve our problems, and we're just left in this cycle. Obviously, we don't really know how to live very well. And Jesus comes along and he says, actually, follow me. If you follow me, I will lead you to a life abundant. And we question that. And we say, but your way is kind of lame. Your way has all these rules. Why would I want to follow your way? I want to look at 4 reasons that Jesus actually lived a better life than any of us. By pursuing Jesus, by following him and living like him, you can live a way better life than what you're living right now, okay? And this is for your benefit, all right? So let's look at the first one. If you're taking notes, Jesus lived in light of eternity. Jesus lived in light of eternity, okay? What does that mean? You and I, we live in light of the temporary all the time. We're constantly focused on things in the here and now. What am I going to eat? What am I going to wear tomorrow? What school am I going to go to when I graduate? You know, does my crush like me? When can I get a job? We're always focused on these like temporary things, these things that, yes, they're important, but at the end of the day, they're not that important. There's a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes, okay? And the author of this book decided to figure out what the purpose of life is. Where can I find true happiness in this life? And he decided he was going to do a little experiment, and he decided to pursue all the things the world tells us is where we find fulfillment. He pursued wealth and material possessions. He pursued experiences. He pursued women. He pursued knowledge and gaining wisdom. And at the end of all of those, he always said the same thing: life is meaningless. Look at what Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2 says. This is a very opening verse of the book. It says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Everything is meaningless. Those questions that you ask yourself every day, does my crush like me? You know, when am I going to make more gains at the gym? You know, when can I buy the new Call of Duty? Those questions that you ask yourself every single day, if you knew you were going to die tonight, those wouldn't matter to you. Why? Because they're temporary. At the end of the day, they don't really matter. I had a friend who, I still have a friend, he's not dead, but he did almost die, okay? And it happened a couple years ago. He was at the brink of death, okay? Literally a couple more seconds, he would have been gone, okay? But he made it through, and he was in the hospital for a couple weeks, recovering. And I went to him, and I asked him, like, bro, what's the biggest thing that you've kind of, like, learned from this whole experience? What's the biggest thing you've taken away? How's your life changed after, like, coming so close to death? And he told me, Nathan, when you get that close to death, when your life is almost over, things get put into perspective. Things that you thought mattered, you realize that they don't matter at all. When you realize how quickly your life can end like that, these things that we think are so important, that matter so much, you start to realize that they're empty. You start to realize that at the end of the day, they don't really actually matter. And all throughout Jesus' life, he put the most important thing first, eternity. He put the only thing that will actually last beyond the grave at the forefront of his mind, and he pursued it wholeheartedly, and that was God. I'll put it this way. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this analogy before, but I have this rope here, okay? Now, let's just say that this rope represents eternity, okay? How long is eternity? Forever. How long is forever? Forever. It doesn't end, right? So we have this rope here, and let's just say this is like a timeline of your life for eternity, and eternity is eternal, so obviously it's going to last forever. And let's just assume that this rope goes on forever, okay? Eternity, right? It's eternal, okay? That's your life. Now let's just say that this little red sliver right here is the amount of time that you're going to spend in this life right here in the temporary. We tend to think 100 years. If I make it to 100 years, that's a lot of time, but the reality is, like, compared to eternity, it's nothing, right? And so I had to make this bigger so you could see it. Compared to eternity, the temporary, maybe if you make it to 100, it's not really that big. So, like, let's just say you're, like, right here. Aw, look at you. You're right here. You've lived your life. You were born, lived a few years. You went to school. Now you're in high school. Great. That's awesome. And for many of us, the biggest thing on our mind right now is, like, in a couple years, I'm going to graduate. Aw, yeah. Maybe for some of you, that's, like, in a few weeks, okay? I'm going to graduate, like, right here. And then once I graduate, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to go there for a few years, and maybe I'll graduate, like, right here. And then hopefully when I graduate, I'll be able to get a nice job. I'll be able to get a nice car. Maybe I'll be able to somehow afford rent in Vancouver. And maybe that'll happen like right here. And then, I've got some money. So maybe I'll start like talking to some people and maybe meet somebody nice. And we'll date a few years and then get married here. And then maybe have some kids. And then maybe I'll retire here. And then one day I'm going to die. Okay? And then you're dead. But guess what? The Bible says that while the body dies, the soul lives on forever. And so many of us are so focused on this little red sliver. We're so focused on what am I going to eat tomorrow, what am I going to wear tomorrow, when am I going to get my break, when am I going to become famous, when am I going to make it on YouTube or TikTok, when am I going to finally meet a girlfriend or a boyfriend, when am I going to finally get to college. All these things, we're so focused on a little thing, and we don't really care at all about what's coming after. The sad thing is, you think you have this entire time. If you're here, you think you have all this left. You don't know that for sure. You never know when your life could be taken from you in a moment. And if we don't take time to really think about where we're going after we die, the most important questions in life, then we've lived our entire life for this red sliver and completely forgotten about eternity. And yet Jesus comes along and he says this in Matthew chapter 6. He says, "Do not store for yourselves up treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." At the end of your life, when you look back on your life, will you want to think that you just lived your life for the temporary, the meaningless? It might be important for you now, but you ask people on their deathbed, what's your biggest regret? A lot of them say, man, I didn't spend my time the way I should have. I was too focused on things that didn't matter. I wasted my years chasing things that at the end of the day left me wanting more. When you look back on your life, how do you want to feel like you've lived? If you live like Jesus did, you're storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You're living for eternity, not the temporary. So that's the first way that Jesus actually lived better than us. The second way, if you're taking notes, is that Jesus lived for the opinion of one, and that one is God. He only lived for God's opinion. Can you imagine how frustrating it would have been to be Jesus? Right? Jesus is here on earth, and he's just trying to help people, right? He's going through town, he's teaching them the scriptures, he's going and he's healing people, he's helping people, he's casting demons out. He's doing God's work. And what does he get in return? He gets misunderstood, he gets mocked, he gets called names, and he gets ostracized. People judge him, people condemn him, and it all led to eventually him dying. He was one of the most hated men at his time, and all he was trying to do was help people. I'm the type of person that if I find out that you don't like me, I won't be able to sleep tonight. Okay? I'll be up all night trying to figure out what I did wrong. Is anybody else like that? Yeah. So many of us live for the opinion of other people. Oh, this person doesn't like me, or I don't have as many followers as that person has. We live for the attention and the applause of others. We're all consumed with this. We live for likes. We live for followers. If we're honest, most of what we do in our day is motivated by one question: will I be accepted? If I do this, will people like me? If I act this way, will I be accepted in this group? Will I be seen as successful? Will I be seen as smart? Will I be seen as attractive? Will I be seen as funny? We do all of these things. We live our life just because we want to be accepted, and we want people to think we're great. And yet for Jesus, he didn't live for that. How easy would it have been for Jesus to go with what the crowd wanted? How easy would it have been for him to be the type of Messiah that everyone wanted him to be? But he wasn't concerned about other people's opinions because he was more concerned with God's opinion. Jesus' identity was rooted in who God said he was. So opinions and what people wanted him to do, it didn't shake him. Can you imagine for a moment what it would be like for you to be free from the weight of what other people thought about you? I mean, think about that for a moment. So many of us are concerned with if we're accepted or not, if we're liked or not. Can you imagine how freeing it would be for you to not worry, to not have that thought motivate and drive you your entire life, to live free from the pressure of the crowd. Many of us can't even imagine a world where that's a reality for us because we've been so bought into the idea that we need other people's approval and acceptance. Living like Jesus means you realize whose opinion is most important, and it's God's. Meaning that if I'm pursuing Jesus, if I'm living for him and I'm approved by him, I don't need the approval of others. So they can hate on me all they want. I know my identity is rooted in who Jesus says I am, and I'm free from that. Can you imagine how much more fulfilled your life would be? How less paranoid you'd be? Does this person like me? Did I rub that person the wrong way? It wouldn't matter. The third way, if you're taking notes, is that Jesus lived with a trust that was greater than his anxiety. Jesus lived with a trust that was greater than his anxiety. I know it sounds weird to think about Jesus and anxiety, but it's true. Jesus did have anxiety. In fact, I'll show you how he did. Jesus, moments before he was going to be betrayed and arrested and sent off to be crucified, was alone with his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he goes to his disciples, and Jesus is God in the flesh, so he knows what's coming, and obviously if you knew what was going to happen to you, how you're going to be crucified, nails driven through your hands, beaten and flogged, ripped apart, and it was all going to happen because your closest friends betrayed you, I mean, that would mess you up. That would make you feel awful inside. And Jesus knew what was coming, and so obviously he's feeling the weight of everything that's about to happen. And he goes to his disciples and he says to them, Matthew chapter 26, he says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. That sounds like anxiety if I've ever seen anxiety before. Jesus knew what was coming. In fact, after he says this, he goes and he prays to God that, "God, please take this away from me. Please take this cup away from me. I don't want to experience the pain." It says that he was under such intense stress that he was sweating drops of blood. Jesus didn't want to experience the pain that he went through. But at the end of all of that, when he prays, "God, please take it away," he says, "But not my will, but yours be done." So even though Jesus did have anxiety about what was coming, he had a trust in God that was greater than any of that. He knew what God was going to do in the midst of his pain. He knew how God was going to redeem it. He knew that God was for him, even in the midst of the worst moment of his life. So he had anxiety, yes, but he had a trust that far outweighed anything that he was experiencing in that moment. Jesus wasn't some magical pixie who never had any problems in his life. Jesus experienced more problems than any of us will experience in our entire life. But he had a trust in God as his provider, protector, and sustainer that far exceeded anything that he experienced in this life. So following Jesus doesn't mean that your life is going to be easy, but it does mean that God's going to walk with you through it one step at a time. And we live in an anxiety culture. Let's be real. Mental health is just on the rise. It seems like everybody is struggling in some way or another. Some people struggle with it more than others. Some of us struggle with anxiety for really big things that are just wrecking us. Some of us, it's just a daily struggle with small anxiety. But what would it look like for you to have a trust in God that outweighed your fear of the world? What would it look like for your trust to outweigh your fear? What would it look like to have a trust in God with everything that you experience in this life? How freeing would that be? To know that, yeah, your problems are real, but your God is realer. Your problems are big, but your God is bigger. And even if the worst happens to you, he's still forgiven you of your sins. He's still saved you, and you have eternity with him. Think about how freeing your life would be. Okay, the last point, if you're taking notes. Jesus knew the source of true freedom. He knew the source of true freedom. In our culture today, freedom is usually defined as, I want to do whatever I feel like doing, right? I want the freedom to live however I want to live, and I want to do this and I want to do that. If I feel like doing this, I'm going to do it. If I feel like doing that, I'm going to do it. That's what freedom is for everybody. I should have the right to do whatever I want. And then we look at something like Christianity and, oh, what would Jesus do? And we see that as kind of like a restriction on our freedom. Oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do that. There's no freedom in that. Take a moment and really think about this for a second. I get to do whatever I want. Ask that to a drug addict. Ask that to an alcoholic. Ask them, do you really have the freedom to do whatever you want? Ask somebody who's controlled by pornography addiction if they have freedom. Ask somebody who has a gambling addiction if they have freedom. See, we jump onto these sins in our life thinking that we have freedom in them, but the reality is that it's all a trap. We think we have freedom, then we get sucked into this cycle and we're trapped in our sin. And if you've ever dealt with an addiction or a struggle before, you know that there's no sense of freedom in there. Because you can't do what you really want to do. You're stuck in it. You're a slave to it. Jesus knew where the source of true freedom is. That's why when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness by the devil came along while Jesus was fasting and he tried to tempt him in multiple areas. And it would have been so easy for Jesus to just be like, yeah, well, I have freedom, so I'll just indulge. I'll indulge in what the devil wants me to indulge in. It would have been so easy for him to do that. The devil comes along in our life and he whispers in our ear and he tells us, man, you have a feeling for this, you should jump on it. It's going to be good for you. You know, you're going to enjoy it. You know, if you feel like it, go for it. And then we listen to it, and then we get trapped and we become a slave to it. And then suddenly this freedom that we thought we were enjoying is actually making us a slave to the sin that we claimed would bring us freedom. See, God is not trying to ruin your fun. He's actually trying to give you life abundant. He said this in John chapter 10. He said, the thief comes only to kill and steal and destroy, but I have come, Jesus has come, so that they may have life and have it to the full. God is not trying to ruin your fun. He's not trying to limit your freedom. God is trying to show you where true freedom is actually found. Stop and think about it for a moment. Look around at the world around you. Does it seem like our world is experiencing freedom? Or is our world a big slave to sin? Does our world look free to you? Does what the world offers you really lead to life abundantly? Or is it just empty promises? Kind of luring you and promising you that high and then leaving you wanting more. You know it's true. You know it's true. You know that by pursuing your sinful desires, you will not experience true freedom. And yet for some reason, we don't trust God when he says, I've put up these boundaries in line to protect you. We don't trust God that his way is best. And we cling on to the things that are killing us, the poison that we're putting in our bodies. And we're saying, yeah, but I can do what I want. There's no freedom in that. God really wants what's best for you. He's not trying to be a bummer. He's not trying to be a killjoy in your life. So why should you live like Jesus? Because the Bible tells you to? Well, yes, you should. But also, think about what the alternative is for you. To not live like Jesus means to live for temporary things that don't matter. To pursue things that can be taken away from you in an instant. To pursue things with your entire life that in a moment you could die and they could all be taken away from you. To not live like Jesus means to be obsessed compulsively over what other people think about you. To be controlled by other people's opinions and to have no sense of real identity of who you actually are because you're just playing a part for everybody. To not follow Jesus means to live in anxiety and in fear about every little thing that you experience in your life because there's no God to save you, no God big enough to fix your problems, no God to put your trust in. So when you come up against a giant in your life, it's you against the giant. But with Jesus, God's always bigger than the giant. To not live like Jesus means to be a slave to your sin, getting trapped in addictions that lead to broken relationships and leave you feeling less free than ever. See, we should want to live like Jesus because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but it's also going to leave you living the best life possible, far more fulfilling than ever. So would you take God at his word and actually try it? Would you put your trust in him and say, I'm going to live like you, Jesus? Our last point of today, kind of our big idea to sum everything up, is this. Living like Jesus means you care more about things that really matter and less about things that don't. It's quite simple. To not live like Jesus means that you are placing more importance on things that really don't matter or that really aren't significant at all. To put your trust in Jesus, saying, I'm going to put the first thing first, and that's you, God. And if you've never before put first things first and centered your life around Jesus and given him your all, I know it sounds countercultural, it sounds counterintuitive, but Jesus says the best way to lose your life is to try to hold on to it and save it yourself. You lay down your life, that's where you experience true life. So I'm going to give you an opportunity today to do that, to say, God, all that I have is yours. I'm going to lay it down at your feet. So I would ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes.